It's really nice to be here this morning. It's particularly nice to be partnering with BATES, who we've worked with in their current incarnation and their previous incarnation since about 2011, and we've always loved working with them. I have 10 minutes just to flag some of the key changes that are coming down the track under the current government's suite of reforms that fall within the Employment Rights Act. And it's an ambitious suite of reforms. It's caught the headlines. Depending on which newspaper you read, it's either the end of the world or it's a bright new world. The truth is it's somewhere in the middle. Some of these things matter and you need to be aware of them. Some of them are damp squibs and won't make much of a difference. And the idea this morning is just to flag some of those things that are worth noting. So in terms of the first of the four that I'm going to touch on, then I'm going to hand over to Rachel, a colleague from Bates Wells, is the changes that are going to occur in relation to unfair dismissal. Now, you're all familiar with the regime relating to unfair dismissal. At present, you need 2 years service. An employer needs to have 1 of 5 potentially fair reasons to dismiss an employee, and then they need to follow a fair process. Those fair reasons are known to most of you. They are capability, conduct, redundancy, legality, and some other substantial reason. So you can dismiss someone if they misconduct themselves. You can dismiss someone if they're not capable, either because of health or competence. You can dismiss someone if their role is redundant. If there's an irretrievable breakdown, we sometimes refer to that as SOSR, or if there's some legal impediment to them working. But you only need a fair reason if they have 2 years continuous service. Before that 2-year threshold, you have a really free hand to dismiss because it's not working and without any real process at all. We normally suggest that there's some sort of process, but it's light touch. But the bottom line is it's much easier before that 2-year threshold is reached. In terms of the maximum exposure, if an unfair dismissal goes wrong, it's £118,000 or 1 year's earnings, whatever is the lower of those two numbers. So it'll be 118 for a high earner, or it'll be a year's salary for someone who's earning less than that. But the average award for an unfair dismissal claim is £13,000. So the exposure to a claim for unfair dismissal is always much, much less than you think. And I always say to clients, if it's not working, the cost of not dismissing is always far greater than the risks associated with litigation. So you can be bold. You need to do the right things for the business. There are some changes on the horizon. There are 2 changes. The first is that you will no longer need, with effect from January 2027, to have 2 years service. By 6 months, you'll have that right. So the change you need to be thinking about is, how do you build into your probation phase checks that enable you to make a decision in a timely way? And I'm going to suggest you need 3 time intervals: 1 month, 3 months, and 5 months. Those are the review periods, those are the feedback periods, those are the points at which you need to be making decisions. And that may mean you need to change your policies, it may mean you need to look at your contracts, but think about those intervals: 1, 3, and 5. Obviously, removing the cap, which is the other big one, it's not just moving it from 2 years to 6 months. Now there are uncapped claims for unfair dismissal, and that sounds terrifying because the exposure is limitless. But remember, the average award is £13,000, and that average isn't going to change very significantly. The tribunals are very careful about awarding large sums of money. The difference it will make is for high earners. When 90% of my practice is acting for businesses and organisations, and 10% is acting for senior executives. And when someone earning £500,000 a year or £1 million a year comes to me and asks what they can do about an unfair dismissal, and I say that the cap is claimed at 118, it feels like a completely inadequate remedy for someone whose earnings and outgoings are so much higher. I think for high earners this will make a big difference, but for most employees I don't think it's going to change the landscape very significantly at all. In fact, what it may do is stop the need to introduce a whistleblowing claim or a discrimination claim where it just doesn't exist. There's a perverse incentive to weave into your claim some allegation of discrimination purely to remove the cap. So this could be a healthy change. Sexual harassment, there was a change in October 2024 that required employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. And that will change in October 2026 to becoming all reasonable steps. So there's going to be a heavy burden on you as organisations to stop to prevent sexual harassment from happening. And practically speaking, that will involve implementing risk assessments, updating your policies, having bespoke training that you deliver at every level, so at entry level, at managerial level, and then at sort of C-suite. You're going to want different training products so that people are aware of their responsibilities. You're going to need to establish safe mechanisms for people to speak up, and that might be anonymous tipping off mechanisms. It may be that there's a person who is a point of contact, but think about how you have speaking up mechanisms. And you will need to manage third-party relationships. Where these risks are going to crystallize, I think, is in relationships with clients, customers and contractors. So if you're in hospitality, some of the sexual harassment is going to come not from within your organisation, but from the people that your staff are encountering from third-party organisations. So you're going to need to think about looking at the contracts you have with third parties and making sure that there are appropriate standards, indemnities and safeguards. Final two topics before I hand over to Rachel. Fire and rehire. There are three ways you can change the contracts of your staff. You can do it by agreement. You can do it under the terms of the contract. If you have a term in the contract that enables you to make changes explicitly, then the change can happen within the terms of the contract. Or you can flick a switch on the contract and dismiss and re-engage. So you serve notice under the contract and then you re-engage someone automatically, immediately, on the new terms. That is known as fire and rehire. And it got a really bad press after, I don't know if you remember P&O, where the whole fleet was sacked and then they attempted to rehire them on terms. And it stigmatised that whole process. And I think the Labour government have gone a bit too far in trying to ban fire and rehire, because actually it's quite an important mechanism. If you as a business need to make changes and the workforce won't agree, there needs to be a mechanism by which you can do that. That is going to become near impossible when these changes come in October 2026. So do think about your contracts and whether you've got provisions within the contract that enable changes, because after that date, it will become very, very difficult. Final point before I hand over to Rachel. Trade unions are getting a lot from the Employment Rights Act. Rights of access, rights to electronic balloting. In terms of recognition, the thresholds that they have to get over will be easier. But also things around collective redundancies, which are important to unions, are going to become much more punitive. Currently, if you make a mistake with a collective redundancy process, the protective award is 90 days pay per affected employee. That is huge when you're talking about 20, 40, 60 staff. Those numbers get frighteningly large. They're going to double to 180 days. The one thing I'd say about this, although it is empowering unions and giving them much greater rights of access, the reality is, and I don't say this as any criticism to the union movement, people are not interested in joining unions by and large. There are unionised workforces. There are those where there is a small number of staff who are unionised. But you don't see a great groundswell of people wanting to join unions. It's just that their memberships are dwindling all of the time. Their influence is dwindling. So although these are empowering to unions, I think it's going to have an effect right at the margins. You've got to be aware of it. I think you're going to see more attempts by unions to get recognition and other footholds in organisations, but I don't think it's going to be a game changer.
So I'm going to talk about sickness absence now. This has been slightly less headline grabbing than some of the other reforms, but it can still be significant for the bottom line. So as of the 6th of April, 3 days ago, the key changes are, firstly, the removal of the requirement that employees earn £125 a week. So low earners will be able to claim statutory sick pay as well. And statutory sick pay will be payable from day one of absence rather than as previously required 4 continuous days of absence. So employers will need to start paying for one-off days of absence rather than more extended periods. And in parliamentary debates, it's also noted that phased returns will be affected if people have come back from a lengthy absence. So if someone comes back on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they'll now be eligible to claim SSP for Tuesdays and Thursdays, which previously they wouldn't, because they wouldn't have met that 4-day period. So what does this mean for you? Firstly, you should be checking that your contracts and policies are now correct. As of the 6th of April, it's changed, so you want to make sure that the SSP reference is accurate and that it's clear from day one. Depending on the size and makeup of your workforce and how this is going to financially impact you, you may need to sort of balance the books, so to speak, and bring down the cost of any enhanced company sick pay for those eligible, but obviously being careful that you need to consult as necessary if it's a contractual term. You should also equip managers to deal with sickness absence, particularly with one-off days. People often don't grapple with it. They might slightly roll their eyes if they suspect it's on a Friday or a Monday, but they don't typically talk to people about why they're absent. So ensuring that return to work interviews are held, and often at an earlier stage. So you may have a policy that after one day there is a 5-minute discussion with the manager as to the reason for the absence and how we can improve attendance moving forwards. And coupled with that, trying to incentivise a desire to attend the workplace, obviously not with the intention of penalising the genuinely sick. There needs to be care for those individuals, but if you can create that atmosphere where people want to come into the office and turn up to work, then that obviously helps. Secondly, you'll need to build resilience for tribunal risk. The government has estimated an increase in 15 to 17% of tribunal claims as a specific result of the Employment Rights Act changes. And this is against a backdrop where claims have been steadily increasing. So for the last financial year, there was a 14% increase on the previous financial year. And couple that with individuals using ChatGPT to write claim forms, who knows where we'll be. So the key drivers of the increase for the Employment Rights Act are, as Paul says, the unfair dismissal cap is going and the qualifying services reducing, and high earners will now see that as a claim worth pursuing, particularly at a time where finding alternative employment may be more difficult. In October 26, the time limits for bringing claims are increasing, so they're going from 3 months currently to 6 months, so people will have more time to get legal advice, more time to realise they may not have got another job and decide to pursue a claim. That change in itself is expected to lead to an increase of 5% of claims. And then new rights and protections such as the fire and rehire and the third-party harassment is inevitably going to lead to more litigation. So again, what does this mean for you and your business? You need to now expect tribunal claims as part and parcel of your business. So you need to have consistent records in place for performance management, disciplinaries, grievances. And tribunals, because of the increase and the already huge backlog, they will be increasingly delayed. So having that contemporaneous evidence will be critical as memories fade and, crucially, witnesses leave the organisation. To enable yourself to defend it, you need to be able to point to written documents. Ensure that managers understand about disclosure. We always find in tribunal claims that people are careless in what they commit to writing, and it can be very damaging, even if it misrepresents what actually happens. So ensuring that managers understand what they write in emails, WhatsApp, Slack, Teams, could well be disclosed in a world where things will be more disclosable. And then strengthen manager capability through training programs to ensure they have these difficult conversations early on. Because particularly in light of the 6-month qualifying service, don't let issues fester. If someone's not right for the job, if things aren't working, grasp for the nettle. Managers will also need to have better reasonable adjustments awareness and disability awareness. These conversations in real life often don't come where someone discloses that they have a condition under the Equality Act. They might be talking much more general terms, and they might be asking for things to be implemented but not labelling them as reasonable adjustments. Managers need to understand when there are red flags and specifically when to involve HR. And also you should get prepared to fight some claims. As litigation increases, if you get a reputation for settling, you're only going to encourage more and more claims coming through the door. So fight some and show that you won't just be pushed over, but of course, pick your battles wisely. NDAs are changing as well, so plan for transparency. Any NDA, and by that I'm talking about settlement agreements, confidentiality provisions and contracts of employment. So any NDA will be void if it seeks to prevent a worker from speaking about allegations of harassment or discrimination, not limited to sexual harassment, all types of harassment, information relating to those allegations, how the employer responded to those allegations, and the fact that the allegation was made at all. And this will also cover non-disparagement clauses in settlement agreements as well. So settlement agreements, the approach to them is going to change significantly. The value in why you're entering into them will be all about the litigation risk, the time, the cost, the risk of losing, rather than trying to keep all the issues internally within the organisation. It's still going through consultation, this change, so we don't actually have a date for it to come into effect, but it's expected later this year. And there are a few finer details to iron out. But in the meantime, you should be prepared to stop relying on NDAs as a reputational risk management. And it goes back to the point around training managers and ensuring that they're fully equipped to deal with investigations, for example. And given investigations themselves will be disclosable, you want to be able to stand behind your investigation and say, we were told this issue, we looked at it thoroughly and fairly, and this is how we've dealt with it. Final point for me, holiday pay and leave. So the obligations around holiday pay as of the 6th of April are now that you must keep records demonstrating compliance with holiday entitlement, including the amount of leave and pay. There's no set format for these records, and the Employment Rights Act says that the records may be created, maintained and kept in such a manner and format as the employer reasonably thinks fit, so not particularly clear. Needs to be for 6 years, and failure to comply will be punishable as a criminal offence that would potentially unlimited fines. So it really is something you want to ensure that you've got in place. Even more so because the new government agency called the Fair Work Agency, you may have heard of, was set up on the 7th of April. They will have enforcement powers specifically around holiday pay. Now, they don't have enforcement powers on holiday pay as of yet. They will get them soon, we don't know when, but they'll be able to have retrospective powers to December 25. So it doesn't mean you can wait in getting your ship in order in terms of the holiday pay.